Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LOPvox Live with your host, The Ghost Scientist. Join in our exciting conversations that are educational, informative, and oftentimes entertaining. So without further ado, this is LOPvox Live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LOPvox Live. This is your host, The Ghost Scientist. And this evening we got a great show lined up for you. We're going to be covering, well, first off, let me get you guys up to speed a little bit here. I was planning on doing an entire show this evening to cover all of the information that was listed up on the LOPvox or up on the Lunatic Outpost forum site. And we were going to cover, of course, ancient German alien technologies. We're going to cover the Montauk project and the Philadelphia experiment. But after having made so many notations and been researching this for over 20-some years, the show looked like it was going to end up being about 6 hours long, and didn't really think that you folks would be able to handle a 6-hour program listening to me. So, what we're going to do is, this particular Saturday, we're going to run the first portion of this, which is going to be basically covering all of the ancient history and all of the information to kind of bring you up to speed to this point. And then next Saturday, please tune in. We're going to do the second portion of the show of this particular program. It'll be in 3 separate parts, like I said. First part will be today, the second part will be next Saturday, and the third part will be the Saturday after. And of course, check into the Lunatic Outpost forums. I will make sure that I put a post up so that to keep you informed about the times and the schedules. And I've heard from my UK crowd, they really want to listen to the show. But of course, with us doing the show, I'm in California, so I'm on Pacific time, and therefore doing a show at 7 o'clock makes it about 3 a.m., give or take, their time. So they've asked me to try to reschedule so that the UK crowd can, of course, tune into the program here at LOPvox Live. And I'm going to try to do my best as a host of the show and try to get that in so that we can, of course, include our UK audience. So I don't know how much of this that you all have been following, or if you read about the show, of course, from the post that I put up on the Lunatic Outpost website and forum, of course. And so the first part of this, we're going to cover, or I'm going to cover, is going to be the history, the background, as you will, leading up to Germany. So, start out this whole entire program with the Nazi Occult Society formed by Himmler, okay? And the belief was based, the total belief of Himmler was based on an ancient mythical land called Hyperborea. This particular land was first spoken of by Herodotus and mentioned several times in Egyptian legend. British novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton, in his book, The Coming Race, describes a superior race, the Vril, who live beneath the earth and plan to conquer the world through Vril, a psychokinetic energy source. 1888, Friedrich Nietzsche was quoted saying, "Let us see ourselves for what we are. We are all Hyperboreans." In 1903, Bal Gandhar, who was an Indian mystic, identified the southern migration of Hyperboreans and their involvement creating the Aryan race. Thus, in the earliest 20th century, Germans believed themselves direct descendants of Hyperboreans. And they, of course, were destined to rule the world through their power called Vril. Now, what's interesting to note about this is that the beginning stages of belief of Nazi occultism directly through Himmler and Hitler equates directly to this. They believed everything that I just quoted to you, they believed wholeheartedly. And in doing so, they believed that if they followed the beliefs, if they followed these beliefs of the Hyperboreans, they could rule the world through this specific power source that they had. The Thule Society was founded in 1910 by Rudolf Führer, established in Munich, Germany, and Rudolf had previously lived in Istanbul and studied in Tibet. Hitler would later on in his life and in his studies would study Rudolf intimately and his works, and much later even take on the moniker of Führer himself. Himmler, through the guidance of Hitler, appointed Ernst Schaefer to take the first expedition to Tibet in 1931. With consecutive Tibetan expeditions in 32 to 34 and in 36, and a third one between 38 and 39. Bruno Beger was appointed by Himmler himself and was an anthropologist responsible for racial research, and Beger subscribed to Rudolph's theory of an ancient northern race in central Tibet. And in 1937, he led an expedition into eastern Tibet to do scientific research on the Aryan race and the Aryan race characteristics among the Tibetan people. Now, this is important to note. First off, Himmler was tracking the Hyperboreans and doing research on the Hyperboreans and tracking their history, finds that the specific power source that the Hyperboreans and Herodotus was discussing, this vril energy source, which is psychokinetic energy, described as psychokinetic energy, or a psychokinetic energy source. He tracked it throughout its history to Tibet, and through the guise of Beger's research and saying, hey, I'm going to send this team, we're going to fund, he convinces Hitler that this particular power source exists, this vril power source exists, and exists somewhere in Tibet. He creates this research, this Aryan nation research, gets Beger, sends him off to Tibet in order to find this particular technology, if you will, or this specific power source that was spoken of in Herodotus. And so Beger, even though Beger goes there to look for this specific power source, at the same time he's doing research on specific human DNA characteristics within the Tibetan people. And during that, he measures over 300 skulls of the Tibetans, and he finds that what he deemed to be very significant amounts of Aryan features among them, which, of course, I find extremely interesting. First, what gave Himmler, like, where did he get that information? What research did he do specifically within inside of the occult society and the Thule society in which he was a part of or a member of? What esoterics did he learn? Like, what esoteric information did he gain being in the position that he was in within inside the Reich? What did he know that we as society didn't know or didn't have access to as far as information is concerned to get him to send this specific team? I mean, he specifically chose these researchers, these scientists, to go to this one specific place on this planet to search out for this specific power source, this real power source. So Beger finds the real power source within this sacred mountain called Gangren, or Gang Run Borchi, also known as Kalash, the Mount Kalash. Well, Kalash is an ancient pyramid. If you've never done research on this specific mountain that's in Tibet, it's an extremely sacred mountain. And the mountain looks like a very ancient pyramid, or it's shaped like an ancient pyramid. And it very well could be that inside of this mountain, in what is suggested in esoteric teachings, that this specific mountain actually was the very first ancient pyramid that then was covered in a massive cataclysmic event, if you will, that takes place in ancient history. So this ancient mountain, Kalash, which is also, by the way, the center of so many religious beliefs, okay? I mean, when I mean the central part of religious belief, it's the central location, the most pinpoint mecca for Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, and Jainism, and once a year, for centuries, literally for centuries, people have traveled directly to this specific mountain as a pilgrimage, if you will, to go there and worship their specific god, or gods, if you will. So, started out by starting with the Nazis and explaining how the Nazis were using ancient information, this ancient esoteric occult information, and trying to track down the Aryan nation itself, like the specifics of the bloodline, and even within inside of that bloodline, the power, the harnessing of this immense power, this vril, this psychokinetic energy source, and trying to capture it, contain it, utilize it for whatever means that they saw fit, because they specifically, Himmler and Hitler both believed, if they got possession of this specific power source, that they would be able to conquer the world. They would be able to conquer man and humankind as we know it, and gain control over the masses, because they would be the most powerful source on this planet. So, in order to kind of understand the vril, the energy source itself, like the actual object, we can ask the question, well, what is this object? What is this thing? Where did it come from? How did it get here? Is it something that's tangible? Can you touch it? Or is this something that's physical? Is this something that's internal? Is this part of the Kundalini? Is this part of our spiritual nature? Is this part of something that's internal that we have to then somehow manage and grow and sustain and feed and learn and study and make this powerful source of energy come out of us? Or is this actually a physical, tangible technology that the Germans, specifically the Reich, could get their hands on and be able to utilize that source as this omnipotent, omnipotent power source to rule the world? Which to me, I don't know if you folks are listening to this or not, but to me, that's an awfully scary idea. That's an awfully scary concept. But we're going to follow that train of thought. We're going to follow that track, and we're going to see where that track goes and where it leads us to. So, the Hyperboreans, and this is going back to, we're giving some of the history of the Vril and its travels. Where did it come from? How did it come into being? Where did it form? So, the Hyperboreans traveled to Egypt. According to esoteric text, they traveled to Egypt with this Vril object, with this sphere as what is being described. And when they get to Egypt, they form the Egyptian culture. Now, when I say form the Egyptian culture, there wasn't necessarily, according to Herodotus, there wasn't necessarily a specific people of Egypt. They were formed. They were created. And created by these Hyperboreans, who came out from underneath the earth. Specifically came out from underneath the earth. Gives us some direction. Where did they come from originally? And we're going to get to all that. We're going to get to that portion of this. But to form, when they came to Egypt and they form the Egyptian peoples, they form Egyptian society. And the Vril sphere gets known as the Eye of Horus. Now, I'm sure as so many of us in the CT world, or in, especially those who are fans of the Lunatic Outpost forums and fans of LOPvox Live and the radio programs that we do and the information that we put out, I'm sure many of you have done research on Egypt. And if you haven't gotten to Egypt, you should. It will lead you down that path of historical documentation within inside of esoterics and within inside of the information that's put out. So from Egyptian society, the Vril sphere gets known as the Eye of Horus. And within the occult societies, like the illuminated ones, the esoteric ones, the eye is actually known as the all-seeing eye. It's also written about through several contexts of text, ancient, esoteric, medieval texts, etc., as the all-seeing eye. But it was originally known as the Eye of Horus. So, according to this train of thought and according to this research, we get led to Egypt, and we start to realize what the Hyperboreans were working on, what they were trying to accomplish. So they create the Great Pyramid. The cask in the bottom of the Great Pyramid housed the Vril, the actual object, the physical manifested object, housed it. And the Great Pyramid became a power source that put this Vril psychokinetic energy into a fluid solution, or the fluid that would flow into the Great Pyramid, and fill the pool of the Sphinx. If you look at imagery of the Sphinx, and you see how the Sphinx is actually located and where it's located, if you look at it from an aerial view and actually be standing next to it, you can see how it could have been a pool or a large formed pool with this particular object and with this sphinx in the middle of it. And the pool becomes, the question becomes, well, what was the pool used for? What was it? What was this for? Well, the Hyperboreans considered the pool, this specific pool that was surrounding the Sphinx, as a looking glass. A looking glass. Now, if you read or if you study all of the esoteric paperwork on looking glass or on looking glass projects, you'll find out that a lot of projects, a lot of CT stuff on looking glass is all about what? Portals, time portals, or portals to other worlds, or portals to other dimensional space, or portals to the underworld. Now, it's interesting that these particular pools are located in Egypt, where a lot of esoteric information is written, especially in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and you had the Magi, the original Pharisees' magic schools, or the first schools of magic or esoterics, if you will, that are formed during and in the Egyptian culture or during the Egyptian time period. And they believed that this particular pool was a portal to the underworld or the ethereal world for the esoteric purposes. We within SET, myself and several listeners of LOPvox Live and Lunatic Outpost have studied ethereal information and ethereal esoterics, and it leads us down that same type of path. Now, I'm not saying that this is all correct, okay? I'm not saying that you have to follow this train of thought. What I'm saying is simply follow the pieces of the puzzle. And this is what they believed, okay? Follow what I'm saying. This is what the Reich, this is what Himmler and Hitler, following Rudolph's information and his teachings, this is what they specifically believed. And I don't mean they believed this like this was a side story or your uncle's uncle, sister's mother taught you this or told you about this. No, I'm telling you, they believed this wholeheartedly. They had this belief so deeply embedded into their own beings, they created an entire system, an entire political organization, an entire controlling factor based on this information. So, let's get back on track to the Egyptian part of it, but I wanted to keep this rolling back to the fact that this all will play back to the Nazi German technologies that we're going to be discussing in the next program to come. So, so during the Exodus, it's believed that Moses took the vril. Okay, he took the vril from the Great Pyramid and takes his people into the desert. Which was the real reason why the Pharaoh chased them down. I mean, it's always been a question of, of course, religious beliefs, and I'm not going to go off on a religious tangent by any stretch of the imagination, but the religious belief is that Moses freed his people because they were slaves and then helped his people escape to the Holy Lands and to his promised lands, and in doing so, travels out in the desert. They're there for a really long time, and of course, as they leave Egypt, the Pharaoh himself puts together an army. They track Moses and his people across the desert. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually looked at the map or the route in which Moses and his people were to take out of Egypt or during the Exodus. It's not really that big of a trek from where, for the amount of time that they were actually out in the desert. It really wasn't that big of a trek to make from Egypt into Jerusalem or the Holy Lands. So during the Exodus, Moses takes the vril out of the Great Pyramid. He then uses the vril to part the seas in order to help his people escape this psychokinetic energy source, this source that he had contained in a box, which has been described in so many different ways and in so much detail that in my research that I've done, I believe that that's what was considered to be the Ark, or the Ark of the Covenant. I believe the Ark actually was the container, if you will, that housed the vril, this object, this psychokinetic energetic object, and it was used to transport this particular power source or this particular energy source to Jerusalem. So the vril is taken to rest at Haram, also known as the Temple Mount, in the old city of Jerusalem. Where once again, we're talking about ancient Jerusalem, and the object once again becomes a major mecca of religion. So we started with this, with the object itself coming from Hyperborea, which is this ancient underground culture, underground peoples, if you will. We don't know if they were Homo sapien in nature, if maybe they were transplanted to this specific planet. Excuse me. Take a sip of coffee for all of you listeners. So, but they first take it out of Hyperborea, and then they move it to Egypt, create the Egyptian culture and society. You get this massive explosion of technology, of just sheer mathematics, engineering, building, so many technologies and so intricate of technologies. There, of course, has never been a real explanation of how this specific technology or how these technologies came about. But yet you have this culture that's writing about this Herodotus and these ancient esoteric societies writing about these particular Hyperboreans taking this particular technology to Egypt and creating it and using that to create society. And of course then Himmler and Hitler keeping belief, if you will, because of their studies of Rudolph, keeping the belief that this is a real technology, a real power source. They then track this particular power source through Moses leaving during the Exodus and going to Jerusalem, the old Jerusalem, and putting the vril in its cask, in its container, underground, and building this temple, building a temple over the top of it. And once again, like I was saying, this object, this esoteric psychokinetic object, becomes a mecca of religion and religious belief. And it's also given a new name. It's changed now from the Eye of Horus and the all-seeing eye, and it's given its new name. And its new name is Shiva Lingam. Shiva Lingam. and this is actually very interesting that this is actually very interesting that it's given the name Shiva. So this this mecha, this object, which plays a key role in the future dealings with the Nazis, and the real reason for the persecution, if you will, the persecution of the Jews. Himmler and Hitler, and bear with me for a second so you can kind of follow where the research went. Hitler and Himmler both blamed the Jews for the theft, for the original theft of the Vril, or this power source, and taking it to Jerusalem. Because, mind you, according to them, the Aryan race came from these Hyperboreans, who they believe were their ancient ancestors, their origins, the specific origins of the Aryan nation or the Aryan race. So they saw the Jews stealing this Vril object or this power source as being a theft. And they also felt it stole from the Hyperborean Thoth culture, the original Thoth culture. What they deemed to be their Aryan race. Okay? So, due to his beliefs, Hitler heavily studied on this Vril and this Vril object, even taking its symbol as his own. Now, you may ask the question, well, what's that symbol? What's that specific symbol that I'm discussing? Well, you know the symbol as the swastika, okay? But the symbol was much, much older, much more ancient than that. In fact, the symbol of the swastika was given to the sphere, given to the Shiva lingam, and was called by Ganesh, who was Shiva's son, whom had it scribed on his palm. He had the actual object, this specific object, scribed on his palm. During the Harada, and when it was inscribed on his palm, they wanted to find out where did this symbol, how did Himmler and Hitler find this symbol? How did they even know what this specific symbol or the swastika symbol even was? Well, you have to kind of, again, go back in history and bring in some of ancient history, specifically the Knights Templar. So, the Christians are trying to push back Muslims, push back the Muslim belief, or push back the Muslim belief system. And in doing so, the Knights Templar are formed, and they utilize the Knights Templar in order to accomplish this task, if you will. And we're not going to go a lot into, although I could, we're not going to go into a lot into the Knights Templar stuff. And maybe I will make that a completely different program or a different show later on LOPvox Live. We'll do one on the esoteric history of the Knights Templar. But with our program here, we do follow the Knights Templar to the Temple Mount. And the Knights Templar going to the Temple Mount and excavating underneath the Temple Mount and finding this object, this real object, and a series of tablets, Ganosh tablets. On these tablets are instructions on how to use this sphere, this object, this specific object, along with the original swastika symbol, which, of course, like I said, was inscribed on Ganosh's palm. It could be said, if you're following along, if you're following the track of information, if you're following the track of their information, what they believe, it could be that the Knights Templar, this is the power that they gained during their explosion of power, of not only economic power, but even their political power during that time period, that they used this information that they gained from the tablets, along with this power source, the real power source, to gain their power over not only the church, but the state, if you will, during that time period. Okay, well, we have to kind of fast forward a little bit here at the stage in the game. Well, how does this object, the specific object, because if you were with us when we first started the program, and if you weren't with us when we first started this program, I suggest that you go back and listen to the recorded program when it's posted, when it's put up on YouTube. And when we started this, we started out with the Nazis. We started out with Himmler specifically getting Berger to go to Tibet to search for this specific power source. So you ask, how did we get from Egypt, Moses out of Egypt, into Jerusalem, or Old Jerusalem, from the Temple Mount and the Knights Templar? How do we get from the Knights Templar, if you will, to Tibet? Well, we have to fast forward a little bit. And we have to fast forward to the point at which the government at the time, the French and English, were highly indebted to the Templar, and of course you get Friday the 13th from that experience of them wiping out the majority of the Templars. Well, during the Templars' escape, and the formation of the Templars creating the Rosicrucians and the forming of the Illuminated Ones and blah, 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 which we believe that could be specifically from the information, or the esoteric information that they gained from the tablets that they found underneath the Temple Mount, along with this real power source. They then take this object, one of these Templars, or several of these Templars, who knows? There's no real history on this. It's just what's being put down through oral history, if you will. That this Templar takes it to this mountain in Tibet, and the object, which could or could not be the Ark of the Covenant, or this Eye of Horus, or the all-seeing eye, or this real power source, this Hyperborean power source, powered by psychokinetic energy. And I want to say that so that you hear that again. Psychokinetic energy. It was the way to utilize this specific object, or to utilize its power source, was through psychokinetic energy. That's going to play a really huge role later on in this formation. a really huge role. Later on, when we get to the Philadelphia information, the Montauk information, the Project Rainbow information, that's all going to be very, very important to remember, that this specific object was powered and controlled and utilized, if you will, through use of psychokinetic energy. So we have this Templar who takes the object, this real object, to the mountain in Tibet, and once again, which is interestingly enough, once again we see this object becoming a major mecca of religious belief. This is the third time in its historical movement that this specific object has created a point, a specific point, where it's created a religious following, or several religious followings, not only Hinduism and Jainism, but Buddhism as well, Tibetan Buddhism. And then, as these religions come into effect, and they're followed and they're believed, this sphere, this object, this specific power source, the Tibetan people create a monument, if you will, inside this mountain. This pyramid is created within inside of the mountain, and it houses this specific object. So these Tibetan monks, the hierarchy, if you will, would go inside of the mountain and would worship this object. They would worship this specific vril energy source inside of the mountain. And they would learn from this. These monks, if you will, these Tibetan monks, would learn from the object. It would actually teach them all sorts of stuff. Within inside of Mount Kailash, or Kailash, if you will. And when Berger and his team, when Berger and his team arrive in Tibet to do the original historical DNA study on the Aryan bloodline through the Tibetan people, and of course we're talking about the fact that he was there originally he was there, or it's stated historically that he was there to specifically study the characteristic features of the Tibetans, and of course he then studies 300 separate skulls to see what the these Aryan features are within inside of the Tibetan people, and of course he finds that a significant amount of this Aryan bloodline shows in the Tibetan people. But he gets close to the Tibetan people. He's there for 3 separate occasions, 3 separate expeditions into Tibet, and he gets very close to these individuals, to these monks, these teachers, if you will, the leaders of these people, and they tell him about this power source contained inside the mountain that is their God, if you will. They believe is what their God uses to speak to them. So he is then taken inside of Mount Kailash to this specific location where this vril object is housed, is contained. during this process, of course, he's going back and forth between Tibet and Germany, and of course being debriefed by Himmler and Hitler himself and the Nazi esoteric occult society and their members, and he's telling them about this, that he's found the Vril. He's found this power source that is contained inside the mountain. And on his last expedition, okay, this is the timeline of this is very important, very important. The beginning of his last expedition, or the third expedition into Tibet, is in 1938. Travels from Germany into Tibet along with a crew of SS, or what actually becomes the SS. At that time, they were bootjacks for Himmler's occult society. And he takes these individuals into Mount Kailash. They then steal the Vril. They steal the object. They steal this esoteric power source and take it out of there and slaughter the Tibetans that were part of this, that took them into the mountain. They eliminate the people that showed them this internal temple, if you will. And he and his team take this object back to Germany, to the Reich. Now, it's extremely important to note that when they take this object back to Germany, a year later, this is a year, almost to the date, this is a year later, that in 1939, World War II begins. And the question becomes, did they start or did they utilize this particular finding of the object, of the actual physical, esoteric, psychokinetic object, that they utilize that as the starting point, as the beginning stages? Like, now we have this great, omnipotent, omnipotent energy source, and we are now going to rule the world. We're now going to be able to conquer the world using this power source, this Vril. And it's taken deep within inside of the German forest. And a housing is created for it. And some of you may have known or may know this as the German Stonehenge, or the object that looks like the German Stonehenge. It's constructed as a housing device. Okay, it's constructed as a housing device that will contain and empower this particular object, this Vril object. Okay, and a team of scientists, of course, Himmler and Hitler are trying to figure out how to utilize this particular power source to benefit their world domination, their movement towards world domination. So they get a very brilliant scientist, an extremely brilliant scientist by the name of Hans von Kammler. Now, you all are welcome to look this gentleman up, most people who have studied about, or I guess, especially if you've gone through high school and college and you've studied about Nazism and its movements and et cetera, this one singular individual is probably the most secretive individual inside of the Nazi regime. Hans von Kammler is literally the third in control of the Reich. That's how much power this specific gentleman held inside of the German political structure. Kammler gets a team, puts a team of people together. Himmler appoints him to be the specific scientific team to study this object, and Kammler's very, very interested in rocketry. He's very interested in space exploration and in gaining space exploration and going to space. So he utilizes this movement, this occult esoteric movement, or the beliefs, if you will, these esoteric beliefs of Himmler and Hitler, in order to gain money. Economically speaking, he gains a lot of money to build all kinds of things. He builds so many things inside of the Reich, technology-wise, and also creates the V1 and V2 rocket program. Now the question becomes, did at first, when the first conversation takes place between Kammler and Himmler, did Kammler really believe or have the same belief structure, because it's not really said, did he really have the same belief structure as Himmler, and of course Hitler had the same exact belief structure as Himmler, because they both followed Rudolph. But it's not really said whether or not Kammler followed or started to follow the Rudolph esoteric teachings. So, but it doesn't stop him from utilizing the Reich in order to build his rocket program, first off. Then he realizes through the study, because he gets first chance at this, or the first crack at seeing this object, or getting this object, and this is the beginning stages when he actually sees the Vril object, gets his hands on the Vril object. This is the beginning stages of the first part of Project Rainbow. Now, as we go through the program, as we go through the show, there's a lot of information to put out there, and there's a lot of projects that are specifically attached to this timeline. And it would, I said this before I started the program to my producer, Liberty, and to my other producer, Nolo, that it would take a really long time to cover all of that stuff. So we're going to try to cut it up into different sections and in the smaller portions, so you can kind of swallow that information, if you will, and kind of digest it so you get a good grasp of where this thing leads. But at this stage in the game, we get Kammler's first hands-on experience with this Vril. And he literally changes his scope of technology, if you will, his scope of building and engineering and designing of technology based on this power source that he sees. Could you imagine being this guy? Could you imagine being this Hans von Kammler and you're taken in the dead of night, if you will? Follow my train of thought here. I know I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent, but you're taken off into the woods in the dead of night. Who knows? Maybe you're actually shown the way, maybe you're not shown the way, and all of a sudden you are confronted with a technology that you can't possibly comprehend, you can't possibly wrap your mind around, but yet you're looking at it. You're seeing this real object, or this real power source. And then you have Himmler and Hitler both whispering in Kammler's ear, telling him that this power source came from this, ancient Aryan race of Hyperboreans who are from the North Pole, and, they moved their culture from there to Egypt, and it has ties from Egypt to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem to Tibet, and Tibet to Germany, and you're trying to wrap your mind around all of that. At the same time, you're realizing this is one of the greatest technologies of the 20th century. And you're saying to yourself, how can I use this object? What is this thing? Now, mind you, Kammler's a scientist. I mean, he's a true scientist. He's a true engineer and designer. Now, coming from that world of R&D and research and development, and working on projects of research and development, I can only envision from my own train of thought, if you will, what would I be thinking? If I came across this object and saw this and physically saw it with my own eyes, and stood in front of this thing, what would I want to do with it? What would I, as a researcher myself, as an engineer, as a scientist myself, what would I want to try to do with this thing? And of course, to me, I would be trying to figure out, well, how does this energy source work? How is this thing contained? How does it operate? What makes it tick, if you will? And not only what makes it tick, but when I figure out what makes it tick, how can I utilize it? Whether it's a 0-point energy source, or whether this is a utilization of a propulsion system, what can it actually be used for? So he gets this concept. Kammler gets this concept, and he starts doing tests. He builds this elaborate electromagnetic system, this T11, this Tesla 11 magnetic system, deep inside the German woods, puts this object inside of it, starts bombarding this object with all kinds of different things, all kinds of different, electrical waves, electrical current. He's got huge conduits of electrical wiring and transformers, transducers, and these big generators and generation systems, and pumping all kinds of energy to this ring setup that he has, and bombarding this particular object to try to figure out, well, what is this object? What does it do? What is it for? It's said that it's this powerful object, or this powerful deity who's created 3 separate mechas within inside of the social world, if you will. But he saw this in a completely different light. He did not see the Vril as a religious object, like so many other people saw it as. He saw this as an energy source, as a way in order to conquer the world through energy. He thought along the same lines and along the same concepts that I feel that Tesla thought about. What are the ethereal energies that exist, and where do they come from, and how do they play along the lines of this Vril object? So he accomplishes all these tasks. Hitler and Himmler are both believing that Kammler is going to create some sort of channeling device, or some sort of an object to channel the power of this particular Vril, this power source, this sphere, okay? Because it goes from the Vril to a description of this is a roughly 8 foot in diameter, if you will, or roughly an 8 foot in diameter sphere. The outside of this sphere is looks like a constantly moving liquid metal. Imagine like a ball, a perfect sphere, with the outside surface being that of liquid mercury, and the liquid mercury constantly moving on its surface. Okay? And it gives off a very unnatural hum. It gives off a resonating field of sound that only your brain can conceive of. Like you don't hear it. It's not on the audible level, if you will. This particular hum is not in the audible level. It's within inside of your own mind. Like if you come into contact with this particular object, you get this vibration, this hum within inside of your own brain, within inside of the firing of your own synapses in your brain structure, this humming. And he starts bombarding it with more energy. And as he starts bombarding it with more energy, it starts to expel this energy in all kinds of interesting ways, including completely destroying one of the conduit buildings, underground power sources that was attached to this. This object that was trying to contain and maintain this object. It reverberates the energy that was being fed to it through this magnetic field, and reverberates that energy back into the conduit system, blowing up the transformers that are underneath the ground in this housing, killing a pretty good group of his research scientists. About the same time period, mind you, he's doing both projects at the same exact time. Not only is he working on study of this specific object and what maybe this object is capable of doing, and what maybe they can use it for to control a source for it. In comes in a gentleman who he puts in charge of his rocket program, because of course he's taking up too much time. He's putting too much of his own personal time into the study of this sphere. So he has to bring in another individual that he can trust. And he had worked with Wernher von Braun prior to this specific project. Wernher von Braun was part of another scientific team that he worked in, working on the structure of a rocket engine. Prior to this, it was kind of the beginning stages of the V1. So he brings in Wernher von Braun to head up this project, to head up this specific V1 project. And of course, Wernher takes that project over. He starts building and constructing and engineering and designing along with a team of about 185 or 180 scientists. Not only German scientists, but other scientists that they had captured along the way during this process. And this is about early to late, early 1943 to late 1942, in that time frame. And unfortunately, there's not enough information within the documentation of Operation Paperclip. There's not enough information contained within that to give us an exact date. We believe it was sometime between April and August of 1943, or it could have been from November to January I should say from November to December of 1942, leading into 1943. Now, it's not really spoken of directly of who the contact was, who the specific contact was, that contacted Wernher von Braun from the American side. And you might consider this to be like the first stages to kind of help you wrap your mind around it, or wrap your head around it. The first stages of the CIA. These agents who were specifically given the task of trying to infiltrate the German Reich, specifically the scientific department or their engineering department, to try to figure out what kind of war machines they were engineering, what kind of war machines were they trying to build, and of course, can we gain that technology or gain that information? So sometime, like I was saying, sometime during that process of the end of 1942 or the beginning stages of 1943, Wernher von Braun is approached by an agent of America. And, of course, Wernher starts talking about his team, and, he's trying to make a negotiation between him giving up information about this, about the V1, V2 rocket programs that he was working on, and or what would become the V2 rocket program that he would work on. But during that initial stages, that was the initial approach by the American team, or by the American agents, was specifically to gain information on their rocket program. Where was Germany going to be able to create these weapons of mass destruction, or these rockets of mass destruction? Somewhere along the line of them getting this, or gaining this information, or gaining this knowledge from Wernher von Braun, he brings up the name of Kammler, and that Kammler is really the guy that's in control, the guy that's in charge of their engineering and their secret technologies, if you will, the secret technologies engineering portion of this. And they want to meet with Kammler. The English, the Americans, want to meet with Kammler to find out what is it that this guy's working on. And Wernher, through this process, starts having conversations. He starts having talks with Kammler about the fact that he's, discussing that, hey, this is 43. They're starting to see a real falling out, if you will, inside the political structure of the Reich. Wernher von Braun becomes concerned that maybe they're not going to be able to pull this great technology off and build this, this omnipotent, omnipresent weapon to conquer the world and conquer humankind, or conquer society as you know it. So he starts talking to Kammler, and he says, he starts telling Kammler, hey, what happens when this Reich falls apart? What is going to happen to us as scientists, as engineers? And from reading about Kammler, and reading about Wernher von Braun, I find it very interesting to note that during this time period, they're really more focused on as scientists. They're really scientists in this thing, and I don't really believe. And of course that's arguable, and I probably shouldn't get into my own opinion on this thing. But my personal opinion is that, and it's arguable again. My personal opinion is that Wernher von Braun and Kammler were true scientists and not really politically motivated as members of the Reich. I don't really believe that they believed the belief system of Himmler and Hitler, and this esoteric occult full information, or the esoterics gained from their knowledge from the Hyperboreans and Egypt and blah 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 blah. We already went through that, so I don't really believe that they believed that themselves. I think they were more real, true scientists, looking to do research, looking to do engineering. And as a scientist, as a researcher, what you're concerned about as a scientist, as a researcher, is funding. How do you fund? How do you fund building new materials and engineering new materials and building new tech? How do you specifically take the time, if you will, to figure out what is going to happen with the Nazi leadership, where is it going to lead to, what's going to happen with them, and if the Nazi leadership falls apart, then these two specific scientists and researchers would lose their funding. I think that was the driving force for them to get involved with Paperclip, or with Operation Paperclip. I think it was more about funding. And to kind of sweeten the pot, if you will, Hamler decides to let Werner in on this secret. This secret project that he's working on, this frill object, this sphere, this dicloque, and my German's horrible, so don't even try. The last time I did a show, sometime last year, it was on German tech as well, and I had made mentions of it, and somebody said, "Hey, you said that word incorrectly." Well, I'm probably saying it incorrectly because I'm a full-blooded Native American, not German. I don't speak German. I don't have a German accent, so you'll have to bear with me, and hopefully not jump me for not having the ability to speak German. But it is named dicloque. And Werner von Braun and Kammler go to the Americans, come to the American agents, and start having conversations with them about this secret program. Not the V1, V2 programs. Specifically, they start having conversations about this device, about this object, this powerful object that they've been playing with. So, as you can imagine, the Americans are extremely interested in this. Well, what is this thing? What's this power source? Where did it come from? How did you get it? What are you doing with it? How are you working with it? Some of the information is given to the Americans where they're talking about the fact that this specific object has no weight, and it suspends itself in midair, if you will. And anything that it gets contained inside of becomes weightless. So if you put this object, a specific object, inside of, say, a box or a cask or a bell-shaped object, if you will, or a bell-shaped vessel to contain its external energetic properties, it would become lightweight. It would become lighter than, it would be able to get away from the gravitational forces that this planet would put on it, on this particular object. It wouldn't matter if it was stone, or it wouldn't matter if it was metals, it wouldn't matter if it was whatever they put this object inside of, would become this floating weightless object. Well, as you can imagine, the Americans, the American agents, get this information, learn about this information, learn about this dicloque device that Kammler and his team of 68 scientists are working on, and a plot is made to get Kammler, well, first Werner von Braun, and Kammler and his entire team of 68 scientists out of Germany. How do we get all of you out of Germany and get you into the U.S.? How do we get you in the United States? So they hatch a plan. In about 1944, Werner von Braun is brought into America for the first time. He actually disappears during this time, and he's brought into America to make a negotiation because Kamler wants to negotiate not only himself, because as you can imagine, the Americans just wanted Kamler. They wanted to get their hands on Kamler, and of course Braun was negotiating a deal to go along with Kamler, but they really wanted to get their hands on Kamler. But Kamler, of course, was very structured and very attached to his team of scientists. So he was negotiating a deal to get him and his team of 68 scientists out of Germany using the device, using the Dicloque device, to come here to the United States and turn that technology and all of its information that they had studied on it to the Americans. So Wernher von Braun comes here to the U.S. He has conversations with the U.S. team. He then takes the U.S. team back to Germany to create the plot to get Kamler and his team out. Now, this is sometime around the first beginning of 1945. So, in the beginning of 1945, a plot is designed. This plot is to bring an American naval vessel, an American naval ship, to waters that they could get contact to, and I can't really give a pinpoint location of this because it isn't actually said. There is no specific location of where the actual meeting, or the pickup location, if you will, the location at which they brought the device, or they brought the Dicloque device, but the ship is known. The ship is known. And the ship is known as the Eldridge, or Eldridge. A specific special team of black hats, that's what they're called, the black hats, are put on board the vessel to run it and go pick up Kamler and his team of 68 research scientists. And von Braun goes along to be kind of the intermediary, if you will, so he can smooth things out, getting these people on board the vessel to bring them here to the United States. And, of course, bring with them this Dicloque device. So the ship is taken there. The device is put on board. Now, if you were in charge, if you were in charge of figuring out what this device was and what was it capable of doing, you have to ask yourself the question, and of course you'll see where I'm going with this, but you have to ask yourself the question: you're running a secret government program. Who do you choose as your top scientists, or your top scientist, to put on board this vessel to go get this device? Who is it that you put on board? Well, personally, I would choose the greatest scientist of our culture, of our 20th century, right? So they put Einstein goes along. Einstein goes along on this particular voyage. Has conversations with the scientific team that are on staff, and he starts talking about this device, and Einstein gets some real inspiration from this travel, from this trip they take to bring this team and this scientific core team back to the U.S., back here to the United States. And on that, he starts devising a way, of course, with his knowledge, he starts devising a way in order to utilize this energy and this energy source. They start explaining to him that this energy source, you can bombard it with high electromagnetic waves, and these electromagnetic waves, that the sphere will take in these electromagnetic waves, store its energy, and then expel this energy in a really huge way. And of course, Einstein gets extremely interested in this knowledge, or extremely interested in this information, and he gets some ideas of his own. He gets some very, very interesting ideas of his own, and how he can utilize this voyage to do some testing of his own. So when the ship actually arrives in Long Island Sound, this is the first stage. This is the very first stage of this device getting here to the United States. He brings it into the Sound, and they had set up a location. They had set up a underground military bunker, which they had been building, by the way, through this whole entire time frame of them in their creation of this program to get Kamler and von Braun and his team of and their team of scientists and researchers to here to the States. They build this underground bunker system. They build a location to bring this device to, and they initially bring it into Long Island Sound, just off of Montauk Island. And since there's all kinds of other information to get into, and there's all kinds of other information to follow, and we got to this stage. So we've gone through the history of this. We've gone through how the object actually got here, what the object is, or what it possibly could be. We're gonna guess at that a little bit. What could this object possibly be that they would be coveting so greatly, and its voyage, if you will, from its inception of birth, leaving the birth canal of the planet Earth from the North Pole, making its voyage from there to Egypt, and then, of course, finding its way into the hands of Moses. Then Moses moves it to the old city of Jerusalem, and in both locations in Egypt, it creates a Mecca of religion. It then gets moved to the old city of Jerusalem, where it creates once again a major Mecca of religion, and then makes its way to Tibet, once again inside the mountain, becoming a major Mecca of religion. Then from there, making it into its way into the hands of the Nazi German occult society, into the hands of Hans von Kamler, who his team creates a way of dealing with this technology and playing with this technology. Then from his hands, or then from their hands, into the hands of the American scientific team and their core, and them working together. And then now we finally have this object that we started with here inside of the United States, or here in the U.S., in Long Island Sound, making its way to Montauk Island. And I think that this is a really good place to stop, to stop our timeline, if you will, or our story, if you will. And I'm going to open it up because I'd like to, the next portion of this I don't want to do in pieces. I really want to do the next portion or segment, which will be the experiments that are taking place, that are used from this object. And we'll do that in another program. We'll do that in the next Saturday's program. I'll cover those experiments and those experimentations and those formations of technology, or the next series of technologies that come from this object, or from this esoteric energy source, this Vril, this Eye of Horus, this all-seeing eye, this Shiva Lingam, this, et cetera, getting down to where now it's here in the States. So what I'm going to do is, there's quite a few people that are inside a chat I can see that have joined into the program, and I'd like to thank all of you for listening in. I know it's been a lot of historical information for all of you folks, and probably for all of you folks listening as well. And if you didn't get some of the information, or if you didn't follow along with some of the information, I would ask that, please go back and listening to this. I know that LOPvox Live and Lunatic Outpost and LOP Radio do a very good job of getting this program and these style radio programs posted and produced and put up on YouTube and put up on the Bias Propaganda site and on LOP Radio. So, and you, of course, will be able to listen to this at your leisure and take in as much information and do your own background information that you like. But at this time, I'm going to open up the floor to the LOP or Lunatic Outpost or LOP chat guests who are in the room, and try to ask, or at least in my best ability, try to answer any questions that any of you may have. So I would say we're going to take like a 7-minute break, roughly about a 7-minute break. During that time period, we're going to play some music for you and let you get prepared with your questions. Let you figure out what it is that you'd like to ask about the program or about the information that was already given, and I will do my best. I will do my absolute best to make sure that I can answer as much as I can. But, and here's the but, okay? If the questions are outside of this particular section, or if the questions are leading into the next format, if we're gonna lead into those questions of the next show, I would ask that you hold those questions off, please. I would ask that you not ask those questions at this time, because I'm not going to answer them. I'd like to keep those questions for the next segment. And then, but during this break, and we're going to take it at the bottom of the hour here. We're going to take that break at the bottom of the hour. We're going to take 7 minutes. During that 7-minute time, please put your questions together, and then I'll read your questions out. I'll read the questions out on off of chat if you don't have a microphone. That's if you don't have a microphone. Or if you do have a microphone and you're on this program or listening to the program at this moment, you're, of course, welcome to key your mic up after the break. After the break, you're welcome to key your mic up, and we can take your questions live and in person, and I'll be happy to try to answer them as good as I possibly can. So I think about this time we got about 30 seconds left. We're going to take this break. I'm going to take 7 minutes. I'll get right back to you after this 7-minute break, and we're going to go right into the Q&A. So, okay, so I'll see you in the next 7 minutes. Welcome back to LOPvox Live. This is your host, the Ghost Scientist, and if you were listening into tonight's program, we were covering the historical documentation and the beginning stages of this program, which is going to cover Sorry about that. I'm having a little technical difficulties. I apologize, folks. And I have to figure out what the settings and stuff are, and I apologize about that. I can't hear you if I turn this thing off, and I don't know how. So, yeah, I apologize, folks. They're talking to my producers are talking to me, and they're explaining to me what I'm supposed to be doing, and I apologize. I'm kind of at a loss. When I took off the sounds like they asked. Okay, so my producer's saying click on yes. Oh my lord. Okay, Heath. Hey, okay, I'm to that point. I apologize, folks. What they're trying to do is my producer's trying to make it so that you don't hear the beep, 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 or the chat sounds. So bear with me a few seconds here, and I apologize, but bear with me a few seconds here. I got that part. I'm to that part. Which one am I taking off? Okay, so hopefully I can still hear you, or hear all of you if you ask a question off your microphone. Because before, when I did this, I wasn't able to. There are a few people asking questions inside of chat, and I'm going to try to read them. Isabella, who's a guest here tonight on the show on LOPvox Live, is asking, my dad was friends with Charles Hapgood, and first he had spoken about blue sapphires being used for something by the ancients at the top of the Himalayas. What is the specific, or what is your specific question? About what the question is. Specifically about the sapphires, no. I know what you're speaking of, or I know what you're talking about as far as the blue sapphires go. I think it more or less was a recollection or a description of what the vril looked like, because it had a glow. It had a bluish energy aura, if you will, around the outside of it that's pulsed with energy, which I could see being seen as sapphires. But specifically about it, no, I don't have any. I don't know. It doesn't really tie into the information out of the esoteric information that the Nazis were reading about, or what they were researching, or their historical documentation from them. But I could see where it could possibly have been explained as blue sapphires. Or hope I did my best to try to explain. Or so my producer Liberty has a question, and I'm going to answer it for him. His question was, what was the origin of and how did the Vril device come to Egypt? Okay, so how it came to Egypt was that was Scarlett's question. Okay, I just saw it as your question. I apologize. So other guest that we have, which is Scarlett, and the question is, what was the origin of and how did the Vril device come to Egypt? According to their oral historical documentation, Vril was a device that was brought out of the earth, or out from under the earth, from the North Pole. The Hyperboreans were I don't know if, like I said during the program, or a real description of whether or not they were Homo sapiens or whether they were sapient. It's very possible that they weren't, or maybe they were the beings that created us, human beings, on the surface. There's several teachings of that. Some of the information that's contained within cylinder seals and documents and clay tablets from the Sumerian culture, that it's very possible that these huts is said that they came from under the earth, that they came from under this world, or under an underworld, if you will. They brought with them this object, brought with them this power source, and specifically brought it to the cradle, to what they considered to be the cradle of life, being that of the Northern Africa, and formed the Egyptian society, or created the Egyptian society and its hearing. So I hope that I was able to where it came from. It came from under the, inside of the planet, or out from underneath the planet, from was the North Pole. And I've actually, even hearing that, I've had lots got me into research trip, in his aircraft into the planet, or into what he considered to be, hollow Earth. And I think that maybe this is the region that was spoken about in this oral history of the Hyperboreans, or that Herodotus speaks about, is that maybe that was where they came from. Was this ancient culture that lived underneath within the planet, if you will, or within the possible. So hopefully that answered Scarlett's question. Another guest, that's another chat guest that's in the asking, or they're asking about. So the Egyptian civilization was built around this, or it was brought there because of the strength and stability of the Egyptian civilization. It's a very good question. Um, according to according to the information, they created the civilization. They actually were the formation of, or if you were to follow the descriptions of it, it would be like almost like they cloned or created or invented the Egyptian culture and its people. Well, I hope that answered. Okay, well, my producer's telling me I'm breaking up, so I'm gonna log out and log back in, get back in here, and try to see if we can clean up the. Well, he may not be recording, so let's hold off on the question until he records, because we can edit some of it. We can edit this stuff out. I have another guest here in the room and a LOPvox chat tonight. It's Boots, and her question is, in the book Earth Epochs, they talk of a cataclysm that involved something going through the center of the Earth and out the other side in Colorado Four Corners area. Could this drill have been in what went through the Earth? I would like to answer that, but I think it's going to go. Again, this is one of those questions where I think that you're going to want to hold off on asking that question until we get to the last program, not the one that's coming up next, but the one that'll be after this, because it'll be answered during that time frame. And I don't want to get into any of that. Like I was saying before, I don't want to get any.
This is Nolo. My question would be, the investigations seem to be about, in the original, the finding the Tibetans and all, they were using it for some sort of psychic research. The Nazis seemed to take it, and it tended to go towards a physical exploration of what it could do. At that point, it seems that the psychic research had been abandoned. So what was the latest development of, what did they come up with, psychically about this thing? And did that actually continue at some point?
Yes, actually, the answer to your question is yes. It actually comes full circle, and you're correct. It started out as this was again, it's described as being a psychokinetic energy source or psychokinetic energy, and more about being part of the experience or mental esoteric experience. And I think that that's the reason why the device or the object itself created these mecca of religious locations. And then, I think then it becomes the Nazis saw this not as an esoteric thing or as a way in order to learn or grow or gain knowledge from, but as a technological object, something that they could possibly use to try to rule or gain control over the earth itself, or gain control over the peoples of the earth itself. And I'm going to hold off on talking about the esoterics and when it comes about. What I will say is, in the next phase, in the next show that we do next Saturday, we're going to cover that. It actually does come full circle, and we learn a lot more about what this Vril object actually is, or what it's capable of doing, not just from a physical standpoint. I hope that answered your question. I have another. We're going to go back to Brain. Brain was asking another question and says, "Any thoughts on this having any connection to Atlantis?" Answer is yes, and we will cover some of that again in the next programs to come. And looking at my clock, my show timer, it looks like I've got about 7 minutes left. Does anybody else here have any questions or have any questions about the show or program that we can answer? And it looks like we don't. I think at this time we're going to take this. We're going to take and yes. The answer to that question is yes. The container is still around. We're going to cover, like, again, we're going to cover a lot of this. We're going to get into a lot of that information on the next. So at this time, I'd like to thank everyone that joined in this evening here at LOPvox Live. And I'm your host, the Ghost Scientist. And as always, I hope that this was enlightening and entertaining. At least you may have learned something you didn't. Please tune in again to LOPvox Live next Saturday as we continue this program. And I hope you all join me for next Saturday's show and program. I appreciate all you tuning in, and I appreciate all your guidance and help from my producing staff. I know that my producer Liberty will definitely be, recording, editing, and getting this posted up on YouTube. And of course, you'll be able to hear, learn, and listen to the program at Bias and LOP Radio. So again, thank you very much. This has been the Ghost Scientist for LOPvox Live.